Hello ladies and gentlemen, welcome back into the studio for another episode on Big Kronos, and with another episode of Big Kronos comes another Q&A. I'll mix in some information about the sculpting happening on screen as well, in between the questions when something interesting occurs. Thank you to those of you who have contributed with questions. Without you I wouldn't have been able to make this video. Now if your questions do not get answered this time around, there will be many more of these, so do not despair. Your questions will be answered eventually. Let's start off with what's going on in the video, so you'll have a bit of a clue about what I'm trying to accomplish in this episode from a sculptural perspective. For the most part, I will be working on the legs, so in many ways it's back to basics. We are talking about contours, we are talking drawing on the clay, we are talking developing form and shape design, slowly growing from inside out while attempting to get the lengths pretty much correct right from the beginning. I will be using a huge pair of calipers, and I'm converting measurements from my 1/3 scale maquette, sitting to the left of the sculpture, and applying them to Big Kronos. The conversion here is pretty straightforward. Just take the measurement from the maquette times 3, and that's the measurement that I applied to Big Kronos. While perhaps not accurate to within the millimeter, it will be close enough for me to use my eye to adjust the last little bit, which is usually all you can ask of any measurement anyways. There's a lot of clay to pack on here in the beginning, and I want some clay on my armature before I begin to build the contour. So I have the opportunity to, right from the beginning, consider where the contour is moving in space. If I simply build a thin wall as the contour on top of the armature, it would travel in a straight line with the armature and not represent the actual high point running down the length of the thigh, for example. It would also be highly unstable and not a very great platform to begin drawing forms on. Forms need some widths to be drawn on too. They can't be drawn in empty space, obviously. They need clay to be drawn on. I have a ton of room to maneuver here because there is such an extensive amount of clay that needs to be added to this before I reach my overall borders. So I really don't have to worry too much about overbuilding. It's going to take a long time for me to get there. In a smaller scale, where you have less room to maneuver because you need less clay, you need to be a little bit more savvy than what I need to be here. You need to be a little bit more savvy with the clay application, that is. I'm drawing a lot on the surface here, using an old butter knife that I like to draw with. I draw because as I add clay, I want to make sure I add clay in the right place to the right forms. In between my forms, I want empty space to begin with, so the figure reads a little clearer and the shape design is put to the fore. The empty spaces between shapes allow me to move and adjust each shape individually if I need to. This means I can block in the entire figure and still remain quite flexible to make adjustments. The increased contrast between light and shadow keeps things nice and easy to read on a visual level, which is something that I do depend heavily on as I work. You'll notice that I have clothespins, or butterflies, attached at a 90-degree angle to the direction of the armature wire. Now these are there to help the clay grab on and keep it from eventually sliding off as I add more clay and more weight to the armature. The leg armature is made up out of 3 really thick square armature wires, bound together by a thinner wrapping wire. I make sure the clay is on there really well, and use quite a bit of force here in the early goings to make sure that it's on and will stay on. Loosely applied clay could potentially fall off, and the first clay that I apply directly to the armature needs to really grab on and be worked in there in order to hold on to the armature. This is the clay that's going to support all the rest of the clay that will be added on top, so if this is applied poorly, the whole thing is at a risk of coming apart. Notice how every piece of clay that is applied, or at least almost every piece, stands in direct relation to the decision being made. So if I'm working on the large sweeping forms of the thigh, for example, I apply larger pieces of clay. And if I'm working on the small and more intricate contours of the knee, I apply smaller and more delicate pieces of clay. The reason for this is efficiency. No reason to build the larger forms with small pieces of clay. It's a waste of time. If your clay is fresh out of the bag, applying pieces of different sizes shouldn't really be that much of an issue at all. The clay should be soft enough for you to be able to do that. And as you can see, all the work is done by hand, or most of it anyway, which I believe is also the most efficient way of blocking in a figure. It gets the clay up there the fastest compared to using a tool. Tools tend to bog you down too much and makes you think about details too much, which at this point, we do not need to think about. You will see me clear up some of the rough contours from time to time with a rake tool. The rake tool is just a big loop that has teeth and it cuts the clay very nicely and evenly. I like to clean up my contours using it to make sure the contours read more like a clean pencil line on a line drawing and not like lines drawn by a shaky hand with a dull pencil, for example. The first few questions of the day is about sculpture and about being a sculptor, or trying to become a sculptor. First question is, how could an absolute beginner start sculpting if there's no teacher available? I don't know if you who asked this question is watching this video, but this is how you do it. There might not be a teacher available in person, but there are so many sources to learn from these days that it's hard to find an excuse not to learn if there is something you want to learn. Search for sculpture on YouTube and you'll find a ton of informational videos. Some perhaps more down the entertainment path compared to the educational path, but there's always something to learn from watching someone else work, no matter what the intention of the video is. I started out watching video tutorials from John Brown, the Gnomon Workshop, and the Stan Winston School of Character Arts. And for the longest time, this was how I learned. I watched the videos and then I tried to do it on my own. My reason for making my process available here on YouTube is because the place that you find yourself in, without a teacher and trying to learn on your own, that's the place that I found myself in a little bit over 10 years ago. I had a desk in my bedroom and I sculpted there while having the tutorials playing in the background. So my videos are intentionally directly aimed at who I was 10 years ago. A lot of the videos I found on YouTube back then were entertaining, but perhaps not so educational. Now, I don't think any of my videos are particularly interesting or entertaining unless you actually want to become a sculptor. The entertainment value is not very high. However, the educational value I believe to be pretty decent, with a lot of information, heavy technical sound information that's extremely useful if the goal is to become a good sculptor. So hopefully you are here watching this and many more videos, dear question asker. And if you ever feel doubt about being able to get anywhere doing it this way, don't. It's exactly how I started out 10 years ago. Let's thank today's sponsors, my Patreon supporters on Patreon, who have ensured the continued existence of this channel and allowed me to upgrade my gear bit by bit, making better looking and better sounding content for all of you watching. If you're interested in supporting the channel, or perhaps interested in getting personal feedback on your sculptures from me, then Patreon is the place for you. You'll get in-depth feedback on techniques and how you can apply them to your own work. Anything sculpture related goes. We can talk about armatures, supplies, mold making, anything you might need help with in your sculpting endeavors. So check it out, there's a link in the description below. And again, thank you so much to those of you who have given generously and supported me. It really means the world. The next question follows in the same vein, but we're a little bit further down the pipeline with this one. How would you suggest getting into a career of sculpting? The way that I see it is that there's multiple factors to be considered here. A huge one is probably luck. You need some luck, but you have to place yourself in a position to be lucky. Now you can do this by attaining a level of skill that is undeniable. If you're not good yet, you probably should not attempt to make it a profession. And by good, I'm of course talking in terms of figurative sculpture, where there is a tangible skill and technical ability that can be objectively judged. If we don't have that, then the only factor really is luck and who you know, which is of course potentially important even if we are talking about figurative sculpture, but that's not a very useful answer, so it's not the one that I will give you. So having some luck and being good enough to put yourself in a position to be lucky are key. This will mean years of education and practice. Personally, I would suggest teaching others as a meaningful way of boosting your way into a career as a professional sculptor. It's very hard to rely on galleries to sell your work, or to rely on yourself selling your work for that matter. So if you're not independently wealthy already, I would say teaching is a good thing to aim for. To be able to teach, however, you need to be credible. Your work makes you credible, or not credible. Do you have good work to show for? I think this is a number one priority. I personally would never go and try to learn from someone whose work I did not respect, especially if I was paying money. So good work, and consistently good work that you can point to as a means of proving your credibility. Then having something to teach is important. I see too many people trying to teach sculpture who perhaps are talented and make good and maybe even great work, but they have nothing to tell you except where the muscles are and some simple proportional rules. All of which you can easily gain access through an anatomy book or even by a quick Google search yourself. That's hardly something you should be paying money to someone to teach you, in other words. Having a process to lean on, a method of sculpture that consistently leads to success and consistently leads to the success of your students is key. If year after year good student work is being created by your students, you are doing something right. So, a method or process to teach is very important. If you're looking for a place to go to school, look for the student work being produced there. Obviously look at the work of the teachers as well, but if the student work is good coming out of the school that you're looking at year after year after year, then it's very likely that it's a good school and what they are teaching works and they actually have something to teach you. Teaching will give you a more sustainable income, an income that you can rely on more than you can on sales. Scheduling your time so that there is time for both teaching and individual work is obviously important. Too much teaching and your own work will suffer. Apply for competitions, contact galleries, and at that point it's really down to luck, I guess. Also, social media. You need to have a social media presence. Post often, post good photos taken with a good camera, post progress pictures and allow people to take part in your process. This will really help you grow your social media presence. Now, none of these things will guarantee success by any means, but it is how I managed to scrounge up what little success I've had so far. People are always interested in the financial aspect of being an artist, it seems. Everyone in your family, for example, when you say you want to be an artist, they'll ask you how are you going to make money doing that? To which you have no answer, of course. So, the question is, do a sculptor make a good living? Is it worth pursuing this very time-consuming form of art as a professional career? So I guess the question is it worth it? And that, I think, depends on what you mean by being worth it. As an example, I live in a modest one-bedroom apartment that I rent together with my girlfriend. We don't own a car, we don't have any children, there's no buying a house in our immediate future. Neither of us make a great living off of our art alone. And the reality for most of us is that we need a secondary income next to our art to survive, which is okay. Now for me that's teaching sculpture, which I love anyways, so that worked out great for me. But it's a modest life for sure, and expecting that you will be able to afford the same things that your friends who are engineers, economists, lawyers, doctors, or some other more traditional job, that's unrealistic. Personally, I make an okay living, but the income does not come from being a sculptor alone. It's a multi-pronged approach in order to make ends meet. But would I trade it for anything else? Absolutely not. I would rather hover around the poverty line and be happy than be rich doing something that I don't like. So, is it worth it? That's really up to you and what you value in life. Perhaps I'm selfish and value my own well-being over, for example, having children, a house, a big yard, a cabin by the beach, and a nice car. For me, it's worth it. I've seen people who have given up their own well-being in order to be what everyone else thought they should be, what society thought they should be, and they didn't seem very happy at all. And they always seemed quite jealous of, for example, what I was doing. And every time I've compromised in order to make more money, or done something in order to make more money, I've hated every second of it and dreamed of being somewhere else. Now, I don't dream of being somewhere else anymore. I'm exactly where I want to be, and I would sacrifice a lot more than I currently have to continue living my dream. For the final question of today, we will get into the technical aspect of sculpture, which I love so much. So this is a perfect question. The question is, what is your approach to depth and contrast? Is it something that just works out automatically, or is it a conscious concern you have to examine on your sculpture? Depth and contrast is not random at all, and rarely works out automatically. Now, the fact is that it works out as a product of the process, so let's explore that for a little bit. How do I make sure that depth and contrast works out? And let's make it a little bit more complex by adding not only depth, but also height or volume, which plays a part in creating contrast as well. There are two particular concepts that lead me towards resolving the issue of depth and contrast. Number one is developing the contour from the four principal views. The four views being the front, the back, and the sides. From these four views, I build an accurate outline of the figure, the contour of the figure. And by doing so, I develop all the heights, all the depths, and contrast comes from that. That solves a large part of the issue, but there is always the information that exists between the four contours. This information is resolved through drawing out individual forms on the surface of the clay and developing their relationship to the contour. So for example, the serratus muscles that run down the side of the ribcage can be observed from the side view, and from this view they have a relationship to the contour of the front and the contour of the back. And this is how they are accurately placed in space, within the human figure. The depth between each of the forms that exists between the contours cannot be objectively observed in the same fashion that the forms belonging to the contour can. Along the contour, we can obviously see the depth between each form, so working it out is actually kind of easy. So when it comes to the information between the contours, I prefer to make sure I slowly approach the contrast that I'm after by having more depth between forms to begin with and slowly building upwards towards the surface. The height or volume of these forms cannot be objectively observed either, so I tend to take more than is actually there. There is some stylistic choices to be made here as well, of course. You can have a sculpture with more contrast and it will appear harsher, or you can have a sculpture that's very soft. I think the subject should, to a certain extent, help decide which one you choose. If the aim is for realism or accuracy in regards to your model, then use the objective information about the heights and the depths, or volumes and depths, gathered from the easy to observe contour to guide you, and the contrast will come from that. Personally though, I prefer sculpture that have more rather than less volume. It's one of the ways I believe we can elevate nature by grabbing whatever little extra volume we can, where we can, and create sculpture that appear more lifelike than life itself. Thank you for watching, I hope you enjoyed the video, and if you did and want to learn sculpture from me or just support the channel, check out my Patreon page. I put out a new video every Thursday, so stay tuned for a new video next week. Hit the subscribe button and the bell to be notified whenever a new video comes out, and if you enjoyed the video, click the like button and share it with your friends and family. It helps me out a lot. Thank you for watching, stay creative, and I hope to see you in the next one.